presentation is about sculptor and civil rights activist Augusta Savage. I'd like to preface my presentation by telling you how I got involved in researching about Augusta Savage. About 10 years ago, I was working on some research for the Rosenwald schoolhouses of Palm Beach County, which were schools that were funded for African-American children in the rural South and funded with monies from Julius Rosenwald's fund. Julius Rosenwald had been the president of Sears Roebuck. As I started doing the research, I discovered that Augusta Savage had received funding from Rosenwald to go to art school in Paris. And of course, Miss Savage ended up going and becoming one of the most recognized people in the Harlem Renaissance movement. As my research continued, I discovered that not only had she been born in Florida, but that she had a very strong West Palm Beach connection and had spent her formative years right here in West Palm Beach. So today's presentation is called From West Palm Beach to Harlem, Augusta Savage, sculptor and civil rights activist. So Augusta was born February 29th, 1892, in a little town south of Jacksonville, which was called Green Cove Springs. Green Cove Springs parallels Palm Beach just a little bit because it was a resort town focused along the water. People would come to Green Cove Springs for its healing waters. So people from the north that had maybe emphysema or other things that they needed to heal with would come down and spend some time in the mild climate and the mineral springs. Over on the right, you'll see one of the tropical trunk maps of how people would get down to Florida on the Jacksonville, Tampa, Key West system. You may have noticed that Augusta Savage was born on leap year in 1892. I was a leap year baby, and it seems to me that I've been leaping ever since. And here's another visual map and bird's eye view of Green Cove Springs. So you can see how the town was laid out and the different deep water docks and all of the pleasure boats that were in the area. This is another postcard of Green Cove Springs and the family frolicking over there. You'll note that the trees are a little different in Palm Beach County. They have the, with the different, look like weeping willows over there. So doing some census information revealed a plethora of information. So on the left over there, you'll see on the 1900 Cornelia Fells, several children, including Gussie, which was Augusta. So she was born Augusta Fells. In 1892, she was born, so she was 8 years old on the 1900 census. You'll also see the occupations of the family in the upper right-hand corner. Her father was listed as a painter and her mother listed as a washwoman. One of the things that Green Cove Springs is known for is its rich, dark red clay, so much different than the sugar sand of Palm Beach County. It was used often to make bricks. So there was the Clay County Steam Brick Company, which her brother actually was employed with later on. Her father, besides being a painter, was also involved in the AME Church. So that's the American Methodist Episcopal Church. Here is an illustration from a children's book, which is called In Her Hands, The Story of Sculptor Augusta Savage. You'll see in the illustrations her mother on the left is a washwoman and her father on the right carrying the Bible. So like many little children, her and her siblings would play in the clay, and the other kids would maybe make some mud pies, but she had a little knack for making figures, and she would make what she saw. So she would make chickens, she would make little ducklings, and she would make little rabbits. Now her father, because he was a preacher, he misunderstood what she was making, and he said that she was creating images, which he called graven images, and he thought that that was a sin. So from the time I can first recall the rain falling on the red clay in Florida, I wanted to make things. When my brothers and sisters were making mud pies, I would be making ducks and chicken with the mud. So here her father would actually stomp on her creations, and she would have to hide them. And of course, her mother, like most mothers, would comfort her and, say he wasn't a bad man, but that you had to respect him. And one of the quotes that Miss Savage said is, "He nearly whipped all of the art out of me." So when she was very young, by 1907, when she was only 15, she married a neighbor. His name was John T. Moore. That's a stock picture of a young couple. So he was 24 and she was 18 on the 1910 census. Jobs listed, he was listed as a blacksmith at a sawmill, and she was listed as a laundress. So it looks like she followed in the domestic footsteps of her mother, which would have been one of the jobs available for her at that particular time. They had a child. So by the time she was 16, she had a little girl whose name was Irene Connie Moore. John passed away sometime before 1910. We're not really sure how. Some people speculate that he had an accident at work, and others speculate that it had something to do with riding a horse or being trampled on a horse. I've been unable to find any official, obituary or cause of death. But that left Gussie a widow and Irene Connie without a father. So about 1915, the family had heard about this area, which was called the Lake Worth Country. So this was early Palm Beach County, and Henry Flagler had opened up these grand resorts on the beach. You'll see the map that shows the barrier island of Palm Beach, and then you'll see West Palm Beach over there to the left. The far left is the actual downtown Clematis Street area. So to get to this area, they would have had to take a train. So they would have ridden on Henry Flagler's Florida East Coast Railway. Now, one has to consider at this particular time that it was under Jim Crow era rules. So the races were separated. So there would have been probably water fountains here in the South that were designated for whites and for coloreds, as well as the passengers. So they probably rode in a different passenger car than the white counterparts. This shows Henry Flagler's Hotel Royal Poinciana. It was a lavish resort, and he had a special railroad that would help people get across. The guests and their passengers had a railroad spur that would come right to the different hotels. And of course, the hotels gave people a great number of employment. So there was opportunity here. There was opportunity to work at the hotels, opportunities to do laundry, and many other things. So I was curious about where Augusta Savage had lived, and I found her on a census. And on the left, it shows the address. They lived at 820 4th Street in West Palm Beach. So that would be on the north end of West Palm Beach, right off of Tamarind, near the West Palm Beach water treatment plant. On the right is the house that was next door to her in 1916. The house on the right would be where they had lived. However, it's not the same house because it's been replaced over the years. But you'll see this second story house on the left. And I went and I looked at the Sanborn maps, and the Sanborn maps, which were fire insurance maps, they show how the wooden structures would have looked at the time. So over there on the right on 2nd Avenue, you'll see 820, which is a smaller structure. And then you'll see 818, which is the larger structure and still exists today. And this is a little close up so you can kind of see the outlines. These maps were made so that people could get insurance and they knew with the fire which structures were brick, which ones were wood frame, and also where the different outhouses and outbuildings would be. It just so happened that they lived across the street from a very prominent couple. So you have Haley Mickens and his wife Alice, and they had built this big house there, and they were acquainted with many people during the time. So they would have different notable people, and some of those that were in the Harlem Renaissance come and stay at their house. So it was a place of reading books and making music and making art. And Mr. Mickens was involved with the school, and Mrs. Mickens was also a school teacher. This is the Mickens house a little bit later. So, I mean, this is the house as it is today, but it gives you an idea that it was a fine big house that is still there. So Augusta would have become friends with them, and he was instrumental in helping her to get clay in West Palm Beach where there wasn't any. She had missed her red clay of Green Cove Springs. So one of the books says that she was able to get clay from H.B. Chase. It said that Mr. Mickens, her school principal, had driven her home from school and told stop the wagon. So I found this little advertisement from the time, and it does mention an H.B. Chase and Las Manos pottery. So at that time, they would have used pottery to make containers for houses, decorative urns, even some of the dinnerware type things, and also for the houses for those red roof things that are for Addison Meisner style. So, you know, they would form over like a man's knee, they would form the roof tiles for the Mediterranean revival style. Now, it's been said that Augusta went to school here, but we know that Industrial High School didn't open till 1917, and she would have been rather old to be going to high school. She would have been well over 20, 22 years old. But Mr. Mickens is said to have given her a job helping to teach students how to make sculpture. So she was getting $1 a day, which was a small fortune for a young woman at that time, to help other students. And that would have been at the Industrial High School in the historic Northwest. That school eventually became Roosevelt High School, and then Palmview, and Mr. Kinsey, Ulysses Kinsey, was the principal. Then she met another influential man who really helped her career take off. His name was George Graham Curry. He's known for many different things. He had come from Canada. He was an adventurer. He served as one of West Palm Beach's mayor. He was a poet, and so he recognized art and he recognized talent. And he actually had Augusta write some poems for one of his books. Another thing that he did was he was instrumental in starting the South Florida Fair, what we call the South Florida Fair today. At the time, it was called the Seminole Sundance Fair, and he allowed her to open a booth to not only exhibit, but to also sell her sculptures. At this time, this was unprecedented because she would have been the first African-American to exhibit at this type of fair. So there were other exhibits at the fair. They would have different contests, like, you know, the most beautiful baby. They had little parades. And then over on the right, you'll see Marvin Mounts, who was the county agricultural commissioner. And it was all about promoting Palm Beach County and promoting the arts. So it was held, of course, in the winter time, and there would be a large number of people that would come. Well, Augusta's booth proved to be very, very popular, and she sold every single piece that she had brought with her. In addition, she won a blue ribbon and $25. So this illustration again comes from the In Her Hands book. The illustrations are done by Jamie Burial. So now here we are in 1920, and she remarries. She remarries a man named James Savage, of whom she took his name. On the 1920 census, you'll see that he's listed as a chauffeur and she's listed as a laundress. Now, Mr. Mickens also had a business where he ran the concession for the wheeled chairs that were basically peddled by Negro men. So when it says chauffeur, it's possible that James was that type of chauffeur. Also, he may have been just a private chauffeur for a private family that would have had a driver and a car. We're really not sure. This image comes from Every Jimerson Clark's book, Pleasant City. So Pleasant City was an area right near where Augusta Savage lived, and that was platted by George Graham Curry for African Americans. It was a upscale African American neighborhood. So the picture on the cover reminds me of what James may have looked like and what he might have done with his job as a chauffeur. It was said in one of the books that James had a penchant for fancy cars and flashy women and frowned upon Augusta working with clay and getting her fingernails dirty. In other words, he wasn't super supportive of her. Now, for 1 year, she went away to a college, and she either attended Florida A&M University, or it's possible that she had gone to Bethune-Cookman University. But she only went for 1 year. But she really wanted to go to Harlem. And this is where George Graham Curry did something that was life-changing for her. He got out his typewriter and he wrote her a letter of introduction to some contacts that he had in New York City. Now, to get there at this time, she probably would have taken the bus. And again, during segregation, it's likely that she would have waited in a colored waiting room. And it's possible that it was a segregated car, or probable that it was a segregated car. And this is just a visual to show how crowded some of the buses were, especially during the busy time of the day. So finally, she arrives in Harlem. And you can just imagine, I mean, she might not have had the right clothes. She probably didn't even have a winter coat. And so it's all full of all these people. White people, African-American people, other people of color. It's noisy. People are dressed, they're wearing their hats. It's so different than Florida. So with her little letter of introduction, she went to Salam Borgum, and she introduced herself and said, Mr. Curry said to come and see you. Would you be able to give me art lessons? Well, he came from a very famous family that of sculptors, and he and his brothers were instrumental in carving Mount Rushmore. So it said, nice to meet you. You can't afford my lessons. She had less than $5 in her pocket at that time, but he gave her a connection, and he told her that she should go to the school down the street. And so she did. So here she went to the academy. Oops. Hold on a second, let's stop. And it was called the Cooper Union School for the Arts, which was a tuition-free school. When she tried to get in, they said, may we see your samples? And she was like, what samples? So it was said that that night she went and she had to carve, and she used someone who was sitting out on the porch in front of the building that she was renting from. and asked if she could, carve in his likeness. And whatever she did, that she was able to get into this school, where she ended up going for 4 years. Very prestigious school in Harlem. So these are some other pictures of the students that are drawing. So they had sculpting, they had drawing, and other arts there. And this is a picture of her while she was there as a scholar. You can see that she was very serious about her work. She loved her work, but she also wanted to be a great sculptor. And this was an opportunity for her to break into the art world, to break some racial and to break some gender barriers. Again, she had the daughter, and she really left her husband behind. He actually remarried later, but she told her classmates and her Harlem friends that her 15-year-old Irene was her younger sister. And in a way, she was. Then she discovered the 135th Street Library in Harlem. So here's a picture of the library. And at the library, there was a wonderful librarian whose name was Regina Anderson. And she helped the students and the young people that came. She arranged different ways that they could meet each other. They could have literary nights, they could have plays. And she was very involved with all of the young people at the time. So here you see some of the students on the left holding a play. On the right over there, they are studying and researching. Now, about this time, she was commissioned by the library to carve a bust of W.E.B. Du Bois. So he was with the Association of the NAACP. He had written several books, The Souls of Black Folk, Black Reconstruction in America, and also wrote for The Crisis. It was a very prestigious job, and then they put the bust in the reading room there at the New York Public Library. So that's the 135th Street branch. And while she was there, she met many people who would become influential in the Harlem Renaissance movement. So the young Gwendolyn Bennett, who was a writer, poet, journalist, and artist herself, and they became fast friends. Also, they would hang out with Langston Hughes, the poet and novelist. Floridian from Eatonville, Zora Neale Hurston, who was also a folklorist and a novelist. And County Cullen, children's writer, playwright, poet. So she was meeting some very influential people. And I'd like to say that they fed on each other's energy. They fed on their philosophies and their intellectual and their curiosity in literature. Of course, they would have hung out at places like the Cotton Club, which was right there in East Harlem, and places where Duke Ellington and his big band played. So things must have been super exciting for her at that particular time. This is kind of an interesting photograph. This is a rooftop party on the roof of Regina Anderson's home there in Harlem. So you can see that Langston Hughes is the second person over there from the left. And then see who else we recognize in here. I don't think Augusta is in this particular picture, but you can see that they're having a lovely time, and people of mixed races. So then something that was life-changing happened. There was a committee that was funding 100 American students to be able to go and study in Paris, France. So Augusta Savage applied, and she sent in her big portfolio. She had to borrow some money from other people so that she could even pay the $35 application fee. And she got into the Fontainebleau School of Fine Arts. However, she never had the opportunity to attend because after she had gotten her letter saying that she got in, they reneged and they said that it was better for her not to come because of her race. So you'll see over here, Negro girl artist barred from school. The application for entrance to the Fontainebleau School of Fine Arts in France of Augusta Savage, a 23-year-old Negro girl, has been rejected by the entrance committee of 8 eminent American architects, painters, and sculptors, says the New York World. So this was over in 1923. And then to come to her defense were several prominent people of the Harlem Renaissance movement. W.E.B. Du Bois of the NAACP actually wrote a letter on her behalf. And it was in newspapers nationwide and some even worldwide, basically saying that she was accepted and then rejected. She was supposed to sail June 13th. And what they ended up saying was that they said that it wasn't them that were prejudiced, but that they were trying to save her from some of the other students who might not like it. So that was the reason for rejection. This also brought it to the attention to Marcus Garvey. So Marcus Garvey was with the Universal Negro Improvement Association and the African Communities League. So many people were starting to notice. Garvey had started what he was going to do was a colonization of Black people back to East Africa, to Liberia, to liberate them from the prejudice they were experiencing during this time in the United States. So it was sort of like, if people aren't going to respect us and give us the same opportunities, we really don't want to be involved with you either. So we will go back and start our own colony. That movement ended up ultimately failing, but there were many people involved with it, including this man here. So his name is Robert Lincoln Poston, and he was a journalist and he was an editor. So this is his passport photo in 1923. He was to go, he got his passport and he was going to go to Africa and help with the colonization. But before he left, he and Augusta became involved and she married Robert Lincoln Poston. And you can see what a handsome couple that the two of them made. So Robert leaves for Liberia. He's gone for about 5 months. They were there, and then on the ship coming back, he actually died from double pneumonia. So it says here, he was chairman of a commission sent by Mr. Garvey to Africa for the purpose of securing land in Liberia or some other portion of Africa to which Negroes in the Western Hemisphere might migrate. According to reports, the commission had been successful. It was only 2 days out of New York when Mr. Poston was stricken with pneumonia, from which he never recovered. Augusta, of course, was broken and shocked. And then she delivered a baby. So baby girl was named Roberta. And sadly, Roberta didn't live to see her second month. She died from possibly SIDS or some other childhood dilemma. So of course that left Gussie with a huge, huge broken heart. So this is some of the artwork that she made shortly after that. It's at the New York Public Library, a bust of an unidentified youth. And the figure looks, somewhat sad and kind of rough and pretty much shows how she must have felt at that particular time. Then there was another blow because a hurricane came through, the unnamed 1928 hurricane. It came across from Puerto Rico and slammed into Palm Beach County in the Glades. And it really leveled many of the buildings and it killed countless people, thousands and thousands of people, primarily migrant workers and people out in the Glades due to flooding. So therefore, her family that was still living in West Palm Beach, they all came up to New York to live with her. So she had a large contingent of the family, including some nephews and her parents, and they were all here in her Harlem apartment. So this is where she was living in 1929 at 284 West 137th Street. It's a Google view of today, so obviously, the little more modern. You can see the 3-story building, and she probably just had, or 4 stories, she probably just had one flat in there. And to kind of give you an idea of where it was located, you'll see the red mark right there, sort of in the center, shows where it was. But it was definitely in West Harlem, so it's south of Upper Manhattan. And you'll see that nearby was the Harlem YMCA, where she ended up teaching later. There's the City College of New York, Manhattan School of Music, the Apollo Theater, National Jazz Museum, and Columbia University. So all of those things, and in those days you would have walked. And the 135th Street Library is not labeled, but you can see 132nd below Harlem YMCA. And then there's 135th over by Lenox Terrace. So while the family was living with her, her 12-year-old nephew posed for a bust. And here is the gammon. So the gammon ended up being very influential. It was painted to look like it was bronzed because she couldn't afford to do that. But she had heard about this opportunity for scholarships. Actually, they were called fellowships, offered by the Julius Rosenwald Fund. So she created this as her entry to try to get the fellowship. So there's Mr. Rosenwald over there on the right. Besides being a Jewish philanthropist, he had been the president of Sears Roebuck and Company. And what he had wanted to do was, before his 50th birthday, to start giving his money away, because he said, one can only have so much money, sort of like Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth. So he gave money that contributed towards over 5,000 schoolhouses in the South, including 11 in Palm Beach County. And then he also funded African Americans for scholarships so that they could have opportunities. So here it is in 1929, the letter from the person who managed the fund. My dear Miss Savage, our trustees of the Julius Rosenwald Fund have decided to grant fellowships to a selected number of Negroes who show promise in leadership or whose scholarship or accomplishment in the arts is outstanding. So they were offering her $1,500 a year towards her studies. Now, she was quite the smart go-getter. So she came back and thanked them for their offer, but she said, to have 2 years studying abroad, I need more than 1,500. And she asked for double that. Well, they turned around and they gave her 1,000 more. And then an interesting move, they said they really liked the gammon so much that they'd love her to make one for their office. And they offered to pay up to $25 for a copy of the gammon. And this is her 1929 passport photo. So if you think of 1929, the end of the Roaring 20s, the Harlem Renaissance, this young woman going off to go to art school in Paris. And you can see her hair is bobbed. She has a look of, look out world, here I come. And so she went to Paris, and there is the Academy and the Grand Palais, all of the museums that she would have gone to. And then I really love the primary sources that are available. So when someone wins a scholarship or a grant or something, there's usually follow-up paperwork. So Fisk University has all of the Rosenwald papers. And so there you can see her follow-up and student at Cooper Union Women's Art School to study sculpture in Europe. And then over on the right, and her position at the time, and this is quite notable, but she was the assistant project supervisor, and this is after she came back from Paris for the Federal Arts Project. So that was one of the WPA programs that were part of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal program. But she says one of the greatest benefits I received from studying Europe on this fellowship was a firsthand encounter with the sources of art, the opportunity to visit the galleries where world famous works of art are on view. Another benefit I received was the opportunity to study wood carving and sculpture in the free manner in which it's taught in European schools, contrasted to the more formal, conventional type of training I'd had in America. And then at the very end, she writes, I feel that the very fact of a Negro's having won a Rosenwald scholarship serves to encourage other Negro artists. For many of the benefits I've received and the acclaim my work has brought has been due to the fact of my having received this scholarship. And then she goes on to say, one example of this is the fact that I'm the only Negro member of the National Association of Women Painters and Sculptors. She took different jobs. You know, at the beginning, she did laundry for other people, but she would take whatever job she could get. She kept moving up the ladder, but at one point it says her present position, foreman and instructor, wax department, airplane parts manufacturing company. And then some of her other activities, designed and completed marble fountain for Walter Lewishon. So she was doing notable work. Of course, that was during World War II later, when she was filling out more information on former Rosenwald fellows. So in other words, they wanted to know what happened after they spent this money investing in people. So the Federal Works Progress Administration, she was able to open up a school in the Harlem Community Arts Center. And here's an interesting poster, which was a WPA era poster. You'll see over there to the right. And it says hundreds are receiving free instructions such as drawing, painting, weaving, lithography, sculpture, etching, metalcraft, photography, even costume illustration. So all of these wonderful things were going on, and she was in on this. So this is a picture from 1939, children playing on the sidewalk. This illustrates what Harlem would have looked like at the time. You know, the open windows, no air conditioning, people sitting on the front stoop, lots of children, the old-fashioned baby buggy there, and, you know, drink a cold Coca-Cola. Another thing that she did was she held an art show for other people at her studio. So you'll see on the left, underlined in red, the Augusta Savage Studio at 239 West 135th Street. So right down from the library. So in other words, besides having her own art, she would showcase the art of other people. This is a beautiful little piece that she made in 1935, Harlem Girl, Lenore. And again, you'll see it was made out of plaster, but painted bronze. And there she is looking down at some figures that she probably made to teach students. She was the first African-American woman to have her own art studio. And she was also very humble. When interviewed, she said, I've created nothing really beautiful, really lasting, but if I can inspire one of these youngsters to develop the talent I know they possess, then my monument will be in their work. And there's a piece she did of Gwendolyn Knight. She was part of the National Association of Women Artists. The portrait head of John Henry, another beautiful piece. She really excelled in all of this sculpture. And then she had the Augusta Savage School of Arts and Crafts, where she taught young children from Harlem. They would come after school so that they would be off the streets and learning a craft and expressing themselves and be with other adults and other children. And she even had the chance to meet the First Lady. So Eleanor Roosevelt came to meet her as part of the New Deal. She was a very hands-on first lady, so she went to Harlem to see what was going on with this wonderful WPA project. So there she is with Gwendolyn Bennett, and Augusta Savage is right next to First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. This is a piece that she made that was a rather large piece. She called it Realization. And at the beginning, when I first saw this, I didn't know what it was, but I did some research, and basically it's depicting slavery. So the woman there on the left with her arms over her exposed breasts signifies someone being sold into slavery on like the trading block. So you can see that she's kind of looking down, very embarrassed. They're probably looking her over. Is she strong? And so she's looking down, and then below her, she has the man who is presumably her husband, and he's like holding on to her, sort of like a small child would, curled up and, you know, helpless to defend her. They're going to be probably separated, and, you know, the awful things that happened during slavery. So realization. And then another interesting thing happened. So Floridian James Weldon Johnson, who he and his sister wrote the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. She had him sit for a sculpture. So there's her sculpture on the right, and they became acquainted. And she was so inspired by his music. And of course, I'm sure that it was sung all of the time, the Negro National Anthem, that she was going to have a piece at the World's Fair in New York City. So for the 1939 World's Fair, she spent a year working on this. If you look at the figures, it's a chorus, a black chorus of figures. They would actually fit together, and then they're in a hand. When it all came together, she called it the harp. So here's some posters from the New York World's Fair, the World of Tomorrow, which was really significant because, you know, at that time, she was on the cusp of something really wonderful. This is a postcard of what it looked like. It was very large. It was 18 feet tall. So put together all of these voices in the choir to sing, cradled by a hand. It looked like a harp. So while she called it Lift Every Voice and Sing, the people at the fair, a lot of people refer to it as the harp. Again, here you'll see another postcard that was actually mailed in 1940. And here's a picture of her in 1938, right before this occurred. And of course, parties. So it was such an exciting time. I mean, to be an African-American exhibiting at the World's Fair. So she had her own salon. So she called it the Salon of Contemporary Negro Art. And she would invite other prominent artists to exhibit at her salon. So it's her first art gallery where they would sell the works of Black artists. And you'll see Selma Burke over there on the right. She's the second person from the right. Now, when her work that she did, a lot of it didn't last very long. In fact, the harp was destroyed after the World's Fair because she didn't have the money to ship it home. And because these weren't bronzed figures, they didn't have so much lasting because she couldn't afford it. So by the 40s, she had gone to upstate New York over to Saugerties, where she lived in a farmhouse. On the right, you'll see it. It looks like how it did before it was remodeled. And then on the left, there it is remodeled. And she was kind of a recluse. She did a little bit of work for people in town, and she would come back twice a year to get her hair done in Harlem. And she came down to West Palm Beach a couple times. I found articles where she was actually speaking at a church group, speaking to a school group. So she, you know, still kept in touch. And her family, many of them lived in the West Palm Beach area, and some of them even lived in Boynton Beach. She died in 1962, and she really kind of died not being super notable, but it was after her death and when people started to do the research like I did and follow her that the story emerged of her, a Florida girl who was just so determined, who faced racial discrimination and fought back and actually went to Paris for 2 years and studied art and helped others. She influenced many other artists, including Jacob Lawrence, and many of her pupils grew on to be famous as well. There's several different books out about her. The one on the left, Graven Images, The Tumultuous Life and Times of Augusta Savage. That has, it's a good read. There's a few things in there where the author filled in and, tried to make it a little bit more of a novel because there's some unknowns. The book in the middle there, Augusta Savage Renaissance Woman, that primarily highlights her life after she was in New York City. And then it also has some color pictures of her various artwork. So that's more like a coffee table book. And then the book on the right, Augusta Savage, The Shape of a Sculptor's Life, just came out in 2022. And that's more like a young adult book. And it's her life put to poetry. So that's a interesting book too. These are some of the many sources that I've consulted. Again, this is a work in progress. I'm very passionate about African-American history, women's history, and Augusta Savage really spoke to me. And I feel like her story is something that more people should know about. And I'm hoping that the city of West Palm Beach will work to get a copy of her Lift Every Voice and Sing sculpture here in West Palm Beach because she was such an important figure. Again, thank you for listening.